The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.
The President of the United States has declared mission accomplished in Syria. He said on Twitter, quote, "A perfectly executed strike last night. Thank you to France and the United Kingdom for their wisdom and the power of their fine military. Could not have had a better result. Mission accomplished." So that's not exactly the phrase that you would want to use, considering the implications of that phrase, with George W. Bush being in his flight suit, landing heroically on the flight deck of a battleship and declaring mission accomplished. And here we are still in those wars 2 presidents later. But that's the low-hanging fruit of what happened on Friday night as the President of the United States struck multiple locations in Damascus, Syria, destroying several targets, and in retribution for the alleged chemical attacks that were allegedly perpetrated by the regime of Bashar al-Assad. There are quite a few things that I would talk about in this story. And I mean, I guess I just have to remain true to me. I keep trying to just do what the popular thing is, which is to, in this case, you see everyone is coming out with their anti-war tweets and memes and comments and, declarations of World War III and all these types of things. And I understand the emotional side of this, and I understand the fear of this devolving into World War III. But if I have to be analytical, which I guess you come here for me to do it, I would say this. I would say that this is the furthest thing from a war. This was not a war. This was a strike that, despite what Trump said, Russia knew about in advance. And to be sure, I'm not really upset about Russia knowing about this in advance. I'm actually rather glad that they knew, so that they could clear troops, that they could clear their air bases, so that there would be less likelihood of casualties and less likelihood of a hot conflict with Russia. So from that perspective, as I look at it and I'm listening to everyone go on their diatribes, and I'm not knocking their diatribes, but I'm just cursed. I'm cursed with the plague of looking at things for what they really are. Now, what I can say about what happened in Syria was that it was an illegal action. It was not authorized by the United States Congress. There was no authorization of use of military force. There was no UN resolution. In fact, there was something to the contrary, blocked by the Security Council request to attempt at a resolution to get some investigators on the ground was blocked by Russia. There was no resolution for any type of action from the United Nations. Therefore, everything that Donald Trump did on Friday was illegal. In international law, it was illegal in terms of the United States. But we really don't pay attention to the end of the United States, because for so long the American president has operated with impunity in his ability to send forces and to strike abroad without the authorization from Congress. Which brings me to another point of reflection that I think is necessary. The reason that President Obama did not honor his red line, his quote unquote red line, was because he did defer to Congress and sought an authorization of use of military force from Congress back when he drew the red line for Bashar al-Assad's chemical attack previously. But still, that's besides the point, because everyone just uses that as they either see President Obama as the bloodthirsty war criminal in Syria, or they see him as the person who didn't go to war and didn't do what he needed to do in Syria. I just find it fascinating that he could simultaneously be both completely opposite things. But not a defense of President Obama, but just purely laying out the facts here. This was not a war this weekend. It was a military strike that was illegal. And this is something that, unless we get congressmen and women and elected officials with the backbone to A, either stand up and vote for military action and put their name on the record and take the responsibility for that, or hold every single president accountable who goes to war without authorization from Congress. That's plain and simple. So in this regard, if this Syria is an amazing quagmire because it exposes every single side of the United States of America. It exposes to a certain degree American imperialism. I think there are far greater examples of American imperialism abroad. Syria is not one of them, but to a modest degree. It does expose the fecklessness of our Congress people because they will not authorize force, even though they want action. I mean, how cowardly are you if you want to see conflict, you want to see war, but you're not even brave enough to put your name on that war? Right? It exposes the presidents of the United States, their willingness to get involved in the quagmire that is Syria, ostensibly on the side of opposing ISIS, because we have the ability, we have long since overstayed or overused our initial authorization of use of military force for the Iraq War. And an extension of that has grown into the war on terrorism, and the war on terrorism knows no boundaries, right? And so we see, if you want to consider this the imperialist arm of the United States, I don't really consider it the imperialist arm, but I think many people are going to just consider it one and the same and not draw any distinction. I just see this as a continuation of the mess that George W. Bush got us into, a generations long war in Iraq, I stand corrected, a generations long global war on terror, which gave Barack Obama the authority, or at least the precedent, and he assumed the authority to be able to go into Syria in the first place to fight ISIS. And once he decided, well, we may need to do something about, actually, let me put the precise language. He said, we absolutely need to do something about Bashar al-Assad, and we need to stop him, et cetera, et cetera. We drew a red line. He crossed the red line. But when he got to that point, he backed off and said, hey, Congress, give me an authorization of use of military force. So it exposes not only America in general, Americans, it exposes our elected officials who want action but are too cowardly to put their name on it, and they won't hold the president of the United States, of any party, accountable for going into conflict without authority, without constitutional authority. That's where we are. Now, on a less important level, in terms of political analysis and political ideology, it exposes everybody on the left, it exposes people on the right, it exposes people in the center, it exposes all of us. It exposes some of us for just being demagogues, anti-war demagoguery, right? And I talked about this last week, where we have a lot to say against war, but what are we actually doing to prevent it? Because it really starts at an institution level. It starts with what's being taught. See, I'm not saying go out there and stop the war machine tomorrow, or else you're not really anti-war. No, I'm not making that straw man. That's ridiculous. What I'm saying is that anti-war, to stop wars, it's got to start at the academic level. It's got to start at the simplest level that you can imagine, at the institutional level, right? Not only in academia, it has to start with think tanks, growing think tanks to actually combat it. Like I really admire and appreciate the People's Policy Project that was started by Matt Bruenig. It is a crowdsourced think tank, but it is a crowdsourced economic think tank. It is not a crowdsourced anti-war think tank. And the reason I would say that there's a lot of anti-war demagoguery, it's because, and maybe demagoguery is not the right word, but grandstanding would be the more precise word and somehow nicer word in this context. But the reason I say there's a lot of anti-war grandstanding is because when the rubber meets the road, if we are not creating institutions, theories, and policies that can actually rival that of America's war machine, then we really are doing nothing but shouting at the wind. And I'm just not one who wants to shout at the wind. So it exposes us on the left as being incapable of doing much more than shouting about being anti-war. But institutionally, we are completely, I don't have the better word than neutered. And we have to start offering institutional options to counter that of the military-industrial complex. And it can start as something as simple as, what you're teaching as a professor on the university level, or what are you organizing? What are you raising money for? Are you creating something? Are you going to create a think tank that is crowdsourced specifically for creating options that are anti-war? And here's the other part of it. When you're going to create options to create a world that is anti-war, you have just taken two things. You've taken on the military-industrial complex, that's a fight that we should be ready to take any time of day. But you've also taken on the complexities of fighting against something that many regard as simply human nature, conflict and chaos in our international order. So these are the thoughts that I had this weekend as I observed. And it's hard to say exactly, what was accomplished with this, because I think the point of the attack was to actually accomplish nothing except for to make it look as though America was doing something. I don't think anything that happened this weekend is going to degrade Bashar al-Assad's capacity for chemical war. I don't think anything that was done this weekend is going to weaken Bashar al-Assad. Russia made sure of that. And again, before someone puts words in my mouth, I'm actually okay with that, with the latter part. If we could actually stop his capacity for chemical weapons, then can we do it without, one, destabilizing him to the point where radical rebels take over and we create something far worse than what is already there? I mean, this is the quagmire that we talked about last week. There is no solution in Syria. There's really nothing that America could do except make it worse, which is why I'm actually okay with the fact that what they did this weekend was nothing more than a dog and pony show in many regards. Because what else? I mean, the only other thing that we could do was just to not even waste those taxpayer dollars and the lives and the fear and the terror. I mean, there's so many side effects of what America did, even if it didn't accomplish anything. It took lives. It caused so much terror on the ground, people not knowing if they were going to live or die. I mean, there was the option of not doing anything. But in terms of a bad option, so far this is panning out to be the least bad option, when the better option would have been to do nothing, because there is nothing that we can do in Syria except make it worse. And yeah, that's almost all I want to say about that, because you can't talk about Syria without jumping into a bed of scorpions of people who are anti-war demagogues who have no solutions. And if you say anything except for hands off Syria, America, imperialism, rah, 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 then they think that you are an imperialist or advocating for regime change. When there's so many different levels between what happened on Friday and regime change, yet you have people going out there and yelling, America is engaged in an imperialist regime change. And I'm like, well, actually, that's not what happened. And I apologize to my audience if you want me to be the guy who just goes out there and says those things because they're the right things for a leftist to say. I'm not that guy. I'm the guy that's going to say the action that took place on Friday was illegal internationally. It was not authorized. It was not an authorized use of force based on our Constitution here in the United States. However, we have a Congress of elected officials who want war but don't want to put their name on it. Neither will they hold the president of the United States accountable. And so the president of the United States has always, at least for the last 16 years, 18 years now, has been able to operate with impunity and to send forces and to take action abroad without having to answer to Congress. And that is a function of both Congress and the president of the United States. And in the case of Syria, where it is an alleged chemical attack, where people wanted something to happen, any option, anything that we could have done was going to make situations worse. And so out of all of the bad options on the table, Russia knowing about this attack, warning Bashar al-Assad, they're clearing the airfields, minimizing casualties, not destabilizing Assad to let jihadists take over, and yet not letting it go in the international community to say, hey, we don't really care that he allegedly used chemical weapons. Out of all the options, this was the least bad option. And I even hate to give that much credit to Donald Trump. And actually, maybe I don't even have to give him that much credit, because apparently, according to CNN, the breaking news earlier this morning, that Trump actually wanted to do far worse, but our generals said no. This is the limit to what we should do. So by now, many of you have seen the video of two black men in a Philadelphia Starbucks being arrested and removed out of Starbucks. The official charge was loitering. And in the video, you see, to the dismay of several white patrons, they're wondering what the hell is going on. Why are you removing these gentlemen who did absolutely nothing? It turns out the two black men were in Starbucks and they were there too long before purchasing something. According to the men, they were waiting on a client, I believe a client or a colleague, and because they were engaging in some type of real estate business and they wanted to meet at Starbucks. And, you know, a couple of things that I've saw this weekend in response, that I've seen rather this weekend in response to this video, has been the dismay of so many white bystanders, people who are looking and saying there just has to be more to this story. No, there really doesn't, because there is the reality of just a generalized suspicion and fear, particularly of black men, but generally of black people in general, to be redundant. And I was listening to a comedian this morning by the name of Kev on Stage, and I have to give him credit for this because I think it is cuts to the core of the matter. He said this morning in a video that if a person, it doesn't matter where you go, but if a person in authority in that location doesn't understand your presence there, or doesn't agree with your presence there, or is intent, and I'm putting quite a few words in his mouth, but this is a sentiment, and I'm expanding on the sentiment, obviously. They don't understand your presence there, they don't agree with your presence there, or they are intimidated by your presence there, then this type of thing happens. And this is sad. This is the sad truth. Last week, a teenage boy was shot. Thankfully, he survived, but he was shot because he missed the bus from school. And he went to knock on a neighbor's house and asked for directions. And the gentleman shot the teenager. Now, that guy has been arrested and charged, and the teenager has survived the situation. I'll put links in the description so that you can get more details on the story. But this is case in point. If your presence, simply being there, causes fear, two things happen. Number one, you could get killed as a black man or a black woman or a black child. You could get killed or arrested simply because of the fear of your presence, the not understanding your presence, or the intimidation, someone being intimidated by your presence. That could cause, this is literally at the core of both of these stories that happened last week. But what else happens is a continuation. It is an expression of the vilification of blackness. It is both a continuation and an expression of that fear, of that vilification that has taken place very systemically since slavery. I mean, think about it like this. People walk past, you get on the elevator as a black man, and you notice people clutch their purse because they have a fear, or they don't understand why you're there, or they're intimidated by your presence. You walk by someone's door, they lock the door. It happens to me all the time. It happens to hell, we do it to each other. I mean, those are just anecdotal, but just think about it. You know, what else could it be when people go to Starbucks and loiter literally for hours to use the Wi-Fi? Kev on stage hit it on the head. He said, that's your business model, Starbucks. Your business model is loitering. Maybe some people buy some things. When they do, it's already overpriced, so we've paid good money. Even though we've been there 8 hours, that one cup of latte was so overpriced that it justified us being there for 8 hours. That's literally Starbucks' motto. But yet, two black guys couldn't sit there without being removed in handcuffs. And I looked at the demeanor of the guys if you watch the video, the guys were so calm. They didn't make a peep. They didn't make a gesture. They didn't argue. They didn't try to justify why they were there. They just went with the police. You know why? Because they knew the gig was up. They knew that there was a strong possibility, if they even sneezed the wrong way, that they would at a minimum, get roughed up. Possibly get hit across the head with a baton. And even possibly be shot right there in Starbucks. Because some employee, some manager was intimidated by their presence or didn't understand their presence. Why? Why do you not understand their presence when people literally are there doing the same exact thing all day, every day? In thousands of locations across this country. It makes absolutely no sense. It makes absolutely no sense except for in the context of what it is to be black in this country. And to be in an area... I'm trying to avoid saying some things because it is extremely frustrating because every black person of a certain age has experienced things like this. Maybe it didn't lead to our arrest, but we definitely experienced. There was another video that came out from Starbucks this weekend, a little bit earlier in the week last week, where one man went in and asked for a key to the restroom or the passcode to the restroom. He hadn't purchased anything yet, and they told him no. A white guy walks in shortly after, asks for the key, pass to the restroom. He doesn't buy anything. Goes in the restroom, uses the restroom, gets the key, gets the password, uses the restroom, comes out, and the black guy's there with his camera, says, "Hey, let me just be sure." He's talking to the white guy. He said, "You just came in." The guy said, "Yes." "You didn't buy anything yet?" He said, "No." "But they gave you the code to the bathroom?" "Yes." And then they went to the counter to talk to the women about it, why they, the baristas about it, why they did that. I mean, black people of a certain age, we just have experience with this. I mean, it's something as trivial but frequent as going into a store and being followed around. Followed around every corner you turn. There's somebody staring at you because they suspect that you're going to steal something. There is an argument. How can I say this? I want to jump over to the Parkland students, Parkland High School, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, and the March for Our Lives crew, who I love. I love Emma Gonzalez and all of them, but I talk frequently about their privilege. And they are aware of their privilege, and they speak of it, and they try to elevate the voices of others. But in this sea of arguments about class versus race, in this ongoing, debate, for lack of a better word, there is a wonderful platform that will be given to you as a black person if you're willing to fight back against white or black neoliberals or black establishment figures who talk about race, or they contextualize everything based on race. If you are the black person who will speak out against that, there's a wonderful platform to be given to you. I know, because it was afforded to me up to the point where I was like, yeah, I'm done. I don't want that platform anymore. When in the primaries, 2016 primaries, and I was like fighting back so hard against Joyanne Reeds and of the world. My following blew up because I was that black voice who had legitimate critiques of black centrists. In this sea of arguments, if you are going to uphold that, and you're going to always say, yeah, but class, be a black person, and always be able to interject and say, well, you got to consider class, then there's a wonderful platform, money, and notoriety and opportunity that comes your way. As you can tell over the last year or so, I don't even care for that platform. You know why? Because at the core of some issues, it is nothing but race. There's no class component. It is completely about race. And if we can't accept that there are some issues that are 100% about race, when it's time to talk about class, then you weren't really on my side when we were talking about race. Right? I need you to understand that, right? Because if you can't look at situations and see that there is no class component there, it is only about race, then how do you expect me to be with you on anything? On anything? Because you abandoned me when it was at the most critical point for me, which was my racial identity, which is targeted in this country for no other reason but being black. Now, if you're wondering why I brought up Emma Gonzalez and the Parkland kids, this is the best example of when class doesn't have anything to do with it, and it's 100% about race. When you look at the platform that was given to the white and non-black Parkland students, took them all the way to a major nationwide march, getting money from every corner of this country. Stars, Oprah Winfrey, President Obama, Michelle Obama, giving these kids all kinds of money and attention. But yet you didn't see nary, yes, that is a very, you didn't see a single black person, kid from that school. And that school is 25% black. That school has a huge African American presence, population. And then you look at it and you're like, well, let's talk about class, because maybe it's because, the black kids that go there aren't afforded the financial opportunity. No. If you live in Parkland, Florida, you can afford to live in Parkland, Florida. There's no Section 8 there. And so if you're living in Parkland, Florida, you are on par to a certain degree economically. And so the only dividing force there, the only dividing factor between why you can see David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez and the rest of their crew on every single major network every single day of the week, yet their classmates who went through the exact same thing, who are black, can barely get any coverage. It's not because of economics, because they are basically in the same economic strata. Of course, I'm sure there's a varying degree in terms of what their parents make and the other kids' parents make, but you never know. They all live in Parkland, Florida, and I lived about 15 minutes from Parkland, Florida, so I know all the people who live in Parkland, Florida are well-to-do. And I only bring that example up not to even to attack David Hogg or Emma Gonzalez, because I actually really appreciate Emma Gonzalez specifically, because of her voice, because of her speech, because of her speaking capacity, because of her willingness to speak out on this exact issue, what I'm talking about right now. She tweeted about that specifically. But the only reason I bring it up is so that you can understand that even in class, even in a class analysis, where class, and there's equality in terms of class, they're still broken down by race and who the media wants to see and who people feel more comfortable around and comfortable sharing their stories and comfortable putting their faces on the movement. There are just some issues in this country that have nothing to do with class and have everything to do with race. And we found, like, all in one weekend, those types of issues just slapping us in the face yet again. There's nothing at the core of the Starbucks story except for the fact that those two guys were black and the people behind the counter were intimidated by their presence or didn't understand their presence or were just all around, just didn't want those black folks there. And subsequently called the police. If you can't be with me at my worst, then you can't be with me at my best. That's the meme going around, right? If you can't stand with us when it has nothing to do with economics, has nothing to do with leftism, has nothing to do with neoliberalism, has nothing to do with any type of class analysis that you could feel comfortable critiquing. It has absolutely everything to do with the fact that I'm a black man or a black woman or a black child. If you can't stand with me there, then you don't deserve to stand with me when I'm giving a riveting analysis that shows you the intersection of class and race and how that is used in this country and has been used as a means of propping up the elite. Hey folks, thanks so much for hanging out with me. That's all the time I have for you this morning because I've got to pay the piper. I've got to sit down here. I'm one of those people who always wait until the 15th. Thankfully, the 15th of April to pay my taxes because I got to pay. I've got to go in here and negotiate with Uncle Sam. And so I would like to spend more time with you, but I can't because I've got to get this this monkey off my back. And so thanks so much for hanging out with me. But you can help support the show by going to patreon.com/the BPD show. Become a patron. Support what we're doing. We're still doing bigger and better things. We've got some huge announcements coming up. This is definitely a time that you want to be associated with Benjamin Dixon and the Progressive Army, like it or not, all the things that we're doing. You definitely want to roll with us because we have some major announcements coming up soon, some partnerships that are coming up. It's going to be exciting. And you can get in on the ground floor by going to patreon.com/the BPD show and becoming a patron today. Thanks so much. Have a great day, everyone. Take care.
The Benjamin Dixon Show is only possible with listener support. Go to www.thebenjamindixonshow.com to register for our blog and join the Progressive Army.